In your own words, can you briefly describe the murders surrounding the death of Officer Eugene Barge and explain what you found so far, what makes them so unusual?
About Eugene Barge.
Yes, sir.
Well, he was murdered on his way to work. Unfortunately, he lived in Fulton County and worked in, well, he lived in what is considered Atlanta, and he worked in College Park. He was in uniform going to work. He come up on a situation in the curb on Rico Road where there was a truck in one lane for the traffic coming from the other direction. There was a truck parked in the road, sitting in the road. And there was a young lady laying out in his lane. And he stopped, opened his door, got out, and was shot from an area determined to be off the road in some bushes where they stepped out of some trees because the shotgun shells ejected there at a distance away from Officer Barge, and he was shot. He was shot twice. The third shot didn't go off, but the killer ejected the shell anyway for some reason, misfired, and then he pulled out a revolver, a 38 Taurus, and walked closer and shot Barge 3 times in the head and left the scene.
But on that same day, there were several other murders in town.
Prior to that, there was a Jeff Lee Stevens. I may have gotten this. It was I think Jeff Lee Stevens. I haven't done a lot of research on him. He's not big on my list to investigate because there's nothing to investigate. He was working for Mike Thievis, who was a porn king of Atlanta. He was connected to the Gambino family, one of the families in New York, as a mobster. He was connected.
And they said also the DeCavalcante family. He was the DeCavalcante family and other families up in New York.
Did he?
Yeah, Thievis was, at least.
I don't know a whole lot of history about Thievis. I thought he came out of the Carolinas.
He was born there, and they say that Georgia for a while was sort of free territory for the Mafia. So
yeah.
He was working with different crime families in New York and Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. He had a good relation with all of them.
Mike Thievis had associates found in their trunk at the Atlanta airport. And he eventually went to prison for killing somebody.
Several people. He killed a bunch of people.
But the thing is, he owned a recording studio in Atlanta. You know, a front to make him look like he's honest. And it was this Jeff Lee, Stevens Jeff Lee, ran the studio, and he was a music producer of Joe South. And Joe South had a hit. Him and Joe had a hit back in those days, The Games People Play. Well, you want to hear about how he died?
Yeah, all of them.
As I understand it, he was into drugs. And of course, Mike Thievis was probably into drugs. And an Atlanta unit got together in a meeting and says, okay, we're going to go by in Roswell Road and we're going to drop in on this music producer and bust him. They had information that there was a significant amount of drugs involved, and they were trying to tie it to Thievis. But there was a crooked cop in that meeting who tipped off Thievis. So he was killed in the middle of the night on that November 7th.
So you
prior to the police officer.
But it seems so unusual because you had a high school teacher, a babysitter, the police officer, and the guy who worked for Thievis. Do you think that was all coordinated?
Absolutely. Well, the thing is, if you see the files over here, paperwork. I have gone places looking for paperwork. You go to the Atlanta Police Department, and they don't even have a record of this this Stevens producer ever being murdered. They destroyed it.
Well, he's buried up in
Huh?
Atlanta. I know he's buried in Atlanta, so they must have records for the burial.
There was a little bit in the papers, but maybe somebody with more clout and a badge could have probably gotten some information. If I could find the police file of where this producer was murdered and who investigated it, and I started seeing names of the same people I've seen in the other investigations, for I know for a fact they covered up the Barge murder. If I could see anything on this movie producer, I could be more certain that it was covered up. I think it's just been destroyed. I cannot find any evidence that he ever existed, except in the newspaper said he was dead.
And
No murder investigation, nowhere.
well, what about, so there were 4 people all in one night, and I believe on your Facebook page you said 6 in 36 hours.
6 and 36. The murders happened on the 7th. The Atlanta Journal paper on Sunday had 6 pictures at the very top. 36 hours of terror or murder or something. But 2 of them turned out to have been murdered by a notorious serial killer who was in town, John Paul Knowles, the Casanova Kid. He killed the Milledgefield father and daughter.
So kind of unrelated.
Unrelated. But he was questioned in the Henry County murder because he was in the area. But no, it was totally unrelated. But the other 4 was the police officer, the music producer, and the 2 people from Henry County, Marvin King and Melanie Hartsfield. I went to college. I don't say I went with Melanie. I went to the same college as Melanie Hartsfield. So I was aware that she had been murdered with a shotgun to the head with an older man. So, I'm aware of the murders. When I heard a month later, that was November, in December, I think I heard that Jerry Banks, the young black man that found the bodies, was arrested. And I had a conversation with God, or either he had a conversation with me. I don't remember who was telling who what. But I knew at that point in time they were going to frame him and that he was innocent. And I just had a connection to him. And I've never been able to let it go. Now, Eugene Barge was murdered because he was trying to put an end to the trafficking of drugs into the Atlanta airport, I believe. Well, from reading the GBI report and the FBI files that are extensive, and you have to sift through these files carefully, because there's 2 groups of people creating these files. Some honest cops, and then some dirty cops. So the dirty cops put stuff in the files that are misleading. You want to know how I figured out that Barge was murdered?
Or what angle there was to killing him? Because you said he was working undercover. And
Let's skip Barge just for a minute.
Sure.
I started in this investigation after I retired from building houses. I said, I'm going to finally do this myself. I couldn't get anybody in the news media to even get interested in the case. Couldn't, from New York, Atlanta to New York, nobody was interested. In fact, the lead crime reporter for Channel 5 said, Charles, you just told me that Jerry Banks was found guilty in 2 trials and sentenced to die in the electric chair. Now, what makes you think I should believe you and spend X number of dollars based on what you think? Couldn't get any help from anybody. But in my very beginning, I was only focused on 2 people from my hometown, my area, the school teacher, Marvin King and Melanie Ann Hartsfield. I investigated them. And in my investigation and in my writing of the book, I think that I did a pretty good job of proving that Jerry Banks was not only innocent, that he was framed. Now, a lot of people get accused of murder and sent to prison and sometimes maybe even die. Those are mistakes. But when you frame somebody, you're hiding something. Why did they frame Jerry Banks? It wasn't to get a conviction. The murders go unsolved all the time. They were hiding something. So after I wrote the book, everybody else, I had people just contacting me from all over the country. The people that used to live here and moved away have followed the Jerry Banks saga for years. They wanted to know more answers, and I did too. And I asked myself, okay, I feel absolutely certain that Jerry Banks didn't kill anybody. So I said, why did Melanie and Marvin get killed? I made a mistake thinking in the beginning of maybe even during the writing of my book and then post-investigation, I was under the impression that they were murdered because they knew something that was going to blow the lid off Sheriff Jimmy Glass's drug industry, which he eventually went to prison for 10 to 15 years and served time. About 5 years after Jerry died. Maybe not that long. But anyway, I went back to the Sunday paper and looked at those 6 pictures again. And I said, what in the world would be the chances that the same group of people killed all 4 of the other victims outside of the serial killer? What if they were all murdered for the same reason? Now, when I was investigating Jerry Banks's murder case is when it came to me that they were related. Jerry was arrested. Well, on Thursday, the murders took place. Thursday around 2 o'clock. 2:30 exactly is when the gun had been heard going off. That's a Thursday. Friday morning, they went back out after the sun came up. Actually, they went out there at 4 o'clock in the morning with floodlights until the sun came up, searching for evidence. Couldn't find nothing from 4 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock. Officer Philip Howard, lead detective, shows up around 9 o'clock, and within 5 or 10 minutes he finds 2 shells and another detective finds a 3rd shell. So there's 3 shells found at the murder scene November the 8th. Those shells were sent directly to the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, documented. Now Sunday comes along 2 days later, and the story is the sheriff sends 2 officers out to Jerry's house and get his shotgun, and they test his shotgun on Sunday behind the courthouse. And the purpose is to take these shells and send them to the GBI and see if the shells from Jerry's gun match the evidence shells found immediately after the murders on Friday morning. And they did that. And this was November the 10th was the Sunday that they said that they fired Jerry's shotgun for ballistics comparison. But they didn't send the shells to the Georgia Bureau of Investigations for a month later.
And in that time, I believe I heard the interview, the chain of custody was broken. I believe.
Well, we're going to go back to the chain of custody. There was never a chain of custody. It was, but the thing is, the sheriff's department on Sunday, November the 10th, fires 3 rounds, biggest murder case in Henry County, and they fired Jerry Banks's gun, and they've got 3 rounds in their hand. Why did they wait a month to send them to the GBI to compare them? That's dead airspace, nothing happening, nothing going on. On Saturday, right after the murders, lead detective Philip Howard gets a call from somebody, and he hightails it to Florida. 3 white men in a white van that were seen leaving the Eugene Barge murder or abducted in Florida. Why does he need to go down there? He didn't bring them back.
Do we know who those 3 men were?
He did. They were the Dixie Mafia.
And he never revealed their names or...
Yeah, he's a crooked cop. He didn't tell anybody. He didn't even make a deal of it, and the Henry County didn't even bring it up that he had gone down there to question these guys. He went down there to tell them to keep their mouth shut, and we'll get you out of this.
And it was just a hit basically to cover up the fact that the police and the Dixie Mafia were all profiting off of the Atlanta airport trafficking drugs.
Hateville, College Park, and another little town, all they're border up to the Atlanta airport. Their city borders, those 3 jurisdictions border the Atlanta airport. And they were turning a blind eye and getting paid handsomely to let drugs go through. But these are happy drugs. Quaaludes. I mean, it wasn't fentanyl. These were happy pills. Hippies were buying them like crazy. I mean, nobody was going to die from this stuff. Even the cocaine that went through. It was just recreational drugs. I'm gonna get paid 5 or 10, maybe 50,000. I don't know what they were getting paid, but they were turning a blind eye and letting the traffic flow. Barge didn't see it that way. As I was told, Barge was working undercover for Jimmy Carter.
And who, if you don't mind me asking, told you that?
A gentleman contacted me, and his father and Barge were very good friends, and he believes that his father revealed that to him. Nothing definite, but I lost my train of thought.
You were saying that Barge didn't view it as just happy pills. He viewed it as...
Well, no. Barge didn't like it. He wanted to put a stop to it. His police chief, Sheets, S-H-E-E-T-S, Sheets, told me that he was investigating the very hitman that killed him, Robert William Johnson, the Dixie Mafia hitman. Let me get back to the thing about how I tied, after investigating the Jerry Banks case of not killing Melanie Ann Hartsfield and Marvin King, they had arrested the 3 guys, suspects in the Eugene Barge murder, poured them over in Florida, extradited them back, and they were being held and questioned. GBI, Atlanta Police Department, FBI was involved, everybody, and they gave them lie detector tests, investigated this, that, and the other. It's all in the file over here. They failed 3 lie detectors. The FBI, now the FBI wasn't doing any investigative work. They were compiling the file based on what the Atlanta and the GBI brought them. They were doing the investigative work. And the FBI said that they failed the lie detector test, that they showed involvement, this, that, and the other. In fact, one even was said to be the trigger man, but he wasn't. But they lied to detectives. They were involved. They were involved. Of course they failed the detectives. But the thing is, they test fired the 3 shells on November the 10th, Sunday, just a few days after the murder. And on December the 1st, if I'm not mistaken, the DA in Atlanta, Lewis Slayton, dropped all charges on the 3 white guys in the white van that failed a lie detector test and let them go. December 1st. December 2nd, Henry County Sheriff's Department, Jimmy Glass and Philip Howard, finally sends the shells to the GBI the next day.
It's almost like they're not trying to hide it.
They couldn't turn the shells in because they knew the 3 guys in Florida were guilty. And if they'd have gone ahead and turned in Jerry's 3 shells that they produced, how would it look for the GBI to say, yeah, Jerry's gun was used to kill Marvin King and Melanie in Hartsville, and then have some honest cop in Atlanta or honest GBI agent really turn the screws on these 3 white guys in the white van and get them to confess that they did do it? Where would they stand then? You know, the rule book says you can only frame 1 person at a time. So before they could frame Jerry and send in those evidence shells, they had to make sure that they were going to get the Mafia off.
Brush them
first.
under the rug.
Now, what other murder case do you wait and sit on evidence shells in a double homicide for 30 days for no reason? They had to wait till the 3 guys were released. And then they sent the shells in. And they matched. Now, I have evidence in my podcast that Jimmy Glass's secretary dated Billy Payne for something like 7 years. It's on my podcast. Billy Payne admitted to her that he planted the shells. The sheriff gave him the shells. Friday morning, murders happened on Thursday night. Friday morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning, that's when they actually fired the shells behind the courthouse. It was never a firing on Sunday. They fired the shells from Jerry's gun Friday morning. Billy Payne says that he went out and dropped the shells on the ground per instructions from Jimmy Glass. An hour later, Philip Howard goes to the scene after they've been out there with 4 or 5 hours with floodlights and everything and couldn't find anything. Within 10 minutes after Philip Howard coming out there, and Billy Payne's already dropped the shell, Philip Howard finds 3 shells. So at that time, now at the time that I realized that Henry County waited 30 days, but only 1 day after the suspects in the Barge murder are released, that's when I knew the murders were connected. Going back to the Barge case, looking through the FBI files, there were 3 phone calls made the morning that Barge was murdered. 3 phone calls one to the police department in Atlanta, one to Hateville, and I don't know where the third went to, but there's 1,000 pages there you can see. These phone calls were witnesses saying, hey, I saw 3 white guys in a white van leave the murder scene of Eugene Barge. Now, normally when a passerby, a witness, a citizen sees something like that, they'll say, yeah, I saw 3 white guys in a white van jump in the van. They took off and they headed this direction. I didn't get their tag number, but there was some body damage on the front, or there was some this, that, and the other, something significant. They didn't give any significant details about something that a normal person might relay. You know what they told the police? I saw 3 white guys leaving in a white van the murder scene of Eugene Bars, and they're staying in room 218 at the hotel in Atlanta, the Atlanta Host Inn. How do they know where they're staying? What kind of witness gives that information?
Somebody who was in on it.
Somebody that wasn't in on it, but somebody that if they had tried to disrupt the apple cart, they would have been laying next to Barge. These phone calls, as I see it, and I'm an amateur, but I'm not an idiot. I had to drop out of high school when I was 17 because I had dyslexia. Dyslexia was discovered in Germany in 1880. And I had a teacher in the 1960s that didn't know anything about dyslexia. I couldn't go to school. I was out of my league. Of course, the military gave me a test and said, you can go to any school you want. Your IQ is 137. You can pick anything you want. So I pick things out and look at things. So when I say it's my belief, I believe that these were cops that were on the take, getting that extra money on a routine basis, turn a blind eye to let these trucks go through the Atlanta airport. They were wrong, but they didn't embrace murdering a police officer that was going to expose what they were doing. But 3 separate people called and said they're staying in room 218, and it turns out that's where they were staying.
They were separate people they called?
3 separate people called. A man, a woman, and I don't remember the details on the third. One called the Atlanta department, one called the Hateville department. I don't remember the details on where the third call came from. But when you have, I don't understand why the FBI didn't pick up on that. I mean, they recorded all this document and put it together in a file, but they were being given this information. Now, if a crooked cop had taken that phone call, you'd have never heard about it. But there was an honest cop picking up the phone, and he was told this information. Even though it's bizarre, he didn't bury it. Because, so when you read through these files, you're going to see some stuff that honest cops put in, and then you're going to see some stuff that crooked cops put in. So, to me, that right there spoke volumes that this was a cover-up. It was a cover-up. There's more evidence. I could go on and on about the evidence.
Well, I was figuring on getting some background about some of the characters involved, and then we could do the filming of the evidence. You could kind of show me, especially the letters, which I've got a couple questions about. And
you got the letter that I sent you?
I saw them. They looked very interesting. They looked vaguely threatening, but it also looked like a letter that you would send somebody who knows who you are.
You want to cover these letters?
Sure. Could I move the camera a little bit?
Yeah. Okay, I found in the FBI file 2 letters, and the first one was kind of an invitation. Let me see. I just had it here. All right. This is a copy of the first letter right here. And it says detective, somebody, it's redacted, so it's detective so-and-so. Meet me on Wednesday night at the Nevada Club at 12 o'clock for details. If I won't be arrested for being involved, bring so-and-so, another cop. Both wear red coats or red shirts. Clay and blank, another cop, are already on schedule for the night before Halloween. So they were going to meet a Wednesday before Halloween. Clay is the police chief of Hateville Police Department. He's invited. In fact, he's already said he's on schedule. Go all the way to the back, talk to the bartender. I will meet you. Don't bring so-and-so, another cop. Don't bring so-and-so. That was redacted out. Watch wives closely, both day and night. Now this is the Dixie Mafia sending a letter to the Hateville Police Department, giving them their marching orders. Like, I don't know, and threaten them.
Threatening their wives.
Watch your wives closely, both day and night. All right, and as best I can tell from this, Clay and so-and-so are already on schedule for the night before Halloween. And at the top he says, meet us Wednesday. So Wednesday must have been before Thanksgiving. And what month does Thanksgiving come in? November. So, now I'm confused. You got to cut some of this out. All right, I've got a second letter here. Mr. So-and-so, it's redacted, who this letter is to. Sorry you didn't keep your appointment last Tuesday. So evidently they had another meeting on a Tuesday after this one here. So it sounds like the police officers were not making their meetings. Sorry you didn't keep your date last Tuesday. Guess you thought it was a joke. The point is, this group feels a cop should live up to what his uniform and his job represents. This group, Dixie Mafia,
And you said this letter was postmarked to pretty
Yeah.
much a week to the day.
Clay, now this first letter was for a Wednesday night, inviting him to this bar. Then this is the only second letter, but in this letter it says, sorry you didn't keep your appointment for Tuesday night. So evidently after inviting him to the bar on a Wednesday before Halloween, they must have requested them to meet again, and they didn't respond. And this is the repercussion in the letter. Clay is getting punished for all men in charge. You for the detective division, and so for the uniformed officers. They're getting punished. Who calls the police department and tells them they're getting punished? Somebody that's got somebody over the barrel. And this goes along when you get paid to turn a blind eye and then things go awry, you get in step. The timing still stands. I'm gonna start over. And after the threat of the different officers of different divisions, the letter goes on. The timing still stands for this Wednesday or Thursday unless changes are made at the last minute. Good luck, Sarge. Please watch out for your wives. They are not the target, but who knows? You just don't get a letter like that and in an FBI file and still let the 3 suspects go. Something is rotten. Now, I want to talk about the timing is still on for this Wednesday or this Thursday. All right, cut a minute. Did I tell you about the Wednesday meeting where they fell asleep in the trailer on film?
Yes.
Okay, pick back up. The timing still stands for this Wednesday or Thursday. See, the murders were originally scheduled for a Wednesday, but the Dixie Mafia spent the night in a trailer of some sort near Eugene Barge's house. They didn't have an alarm clock. They overslept. That goes to Wednesday. It was originally supposed to happen on Wednesday or Thursday, unless changes are made at the last minute. Now, this letter is postmarked October 29th. The next Wednesday after October 29th, the next Thursday, would have been November the 7th.
Barge's death.
Hmm?
The day Barge was killed.
Things are still standing for this Wednesday or Thursday unless things change. Postmark the next Thursday after this postmarked letter was sent to the Hateville Police Department. That Thursday, Eugene Barge was executed going to work. So they're planning and talking to Hateville Police
About executing one of them.
about executing a police officer.
And threatening their wives.
And threatening their wives. Now, I can understand that you've got a crooked Hateville Police Department. Everybody up there. I have checked to see if any of them had ever been decertified from law enforcement. There is a record of every cop in the state of Georgia that has ever been fired and decertified from law enforcement. Not a one of these guys are on that list. I don't know how they maintain to retire. But how can, I don't know how many hands this FBI file went through, why somebody didn't
Look at it and say,
Look
what
at
is
it.
this?
What group is this? It's just mind-boggling. The level of corruption within the Atlanta Police Department and the GBI and the surrounding Atlanta airport, and the GBI, the level of corruption had to be significant to just let this go by thinking that Charles Sargent would never see it.
In your research, you found that Robert William Johnson was likely the hitman, and you showed me two important letters. What made you conclude that Johnson was the killer and that the letters were, I mean, what's so special about the letters?
Well, Eugene Barge's police chief was the first person on the scene because the first person that found Barge was a neighbor. He knew Barge, laying in the street dead. He calls the College Park Police Department. And Chief Sheets was Eugene Barge's, he was in charge of that department. He was the first person on the scene. Of course, he was run off by Atlanta police. They took over the investigation. But Police Chief Sheets told me that Eugene Barge was investigating Robert William Johnson. He told me Robert William Johnson was a Dixie Mafia hitman, and he was after him. I don't know if he was after him for killing somebody or if maybe, I don't know how William Johnson tied into the drug trafficking. But in drug trafficking, you got people like Carlos Later that was bringing drugs from South America to the Caribbean islands. He bought an island with an airstrip on it, and he would land a big, huge military surplus plane full of drugs. People in the southeast would fly down and pay pilots to come down with a briefcase full of money, get a load of drugs, full tank of gas, one pilot, and with the amount of gas and the load of drugs, you could fly from this island just south of Atlanta, and you better have a place to land. And to do that, you had to pay a lot of sheriffs in South Georgia, or around Georgia. I've got an article where I think seven sheriffs were arrested in a span of 2 or 3 days, all for allowing drugs to be flown into the area. Now, you had drug traffickers all over the country that would come down and pick up the drugs. It was their money in the suitcases. They would come down and pick up the drugs and disperse them. Now, if anybody was going to turn over the apple cart, you couldn't have regular cops going around and killing people that were going to upset the apple cart. Eugene Barge was going to upset the apple cart. They brought in the Dixie Mafia for enforcement, and they did the killing. So it was a family involved. But my investigation shows that the GBI in 1974 was dirty. They covered up evidence that would have solved the Eugene Barge murder and the Henry County murders. There was evidence that this crew killed Eugene Barge and then came to Clayton County, Henry County, excuse me. They came down to Henry County and killed 2 people here. Now, that's a mindset for 1974. Most of those officers are probably dead and buried by now. But I go to the GBI in 2016, 17, or 18, and I take evidence to the GBI today, and I show them that I've got evidence that the same people that killed Eugene Barge also killed Melanie Ann Hartsfield and Marvin King. And I guess at some point in time, from 1974, at some point after, somebody in the GBI said, God, we got a lot of dirty people in here. We've got to clean this place up. And they did it quietly. Well, they're still doing it quietly, because I took evidence to the GBI agent Cynthia Atkins and gave her everything I had, documents and everything. And I gave her one document that showed that the murderers of the people that killed Eugene Barge also killed the people in Henry County. When I requested the file on Eugene Barge's murder, the GBI sent me a document, typed out, a list of things that they found in their truck when they were arrested in Florida, a list of things that after they left the motel they threw into the dumpster, but the dumpster had already been taken to the dump. So they go out to the dump and they go through all this stuff that they know came from that hotel. And in that, if you look at the file from the GBI, there's a list of items. But Lisa Harris, who just retired after this incident, sent me a second document. And it's a handwritten document of the final document, where there's a police officer, could be Atlanta, could be GBI. He's sitting there writing down, and the other guys are digging this stuff out of the trash. A beer can, pair of shoes, white jockey shorts, pair of Levi's, another pair of Levi brand, one Levi brand, one Lee brand, and they're just listing all this stuff they find. 9 Taurus pistols. He's writing all this stuff down. But when you look at the final GBI report, everything is itemized and listed. But when you look at handwritten, when it comes to the Levi's, 2 pair of Levi's, they got bloody clothes written in big letters and circled.
And they didn't put that in their report.
Huh? That did not go in the final. That did, and you won't find it in their final document. Now, I took that document to Agent Cynthia Atkins, and I thought I was in good company with an honest cop, and I showed her this document, and we both discussed that document. And I said, Miss Atkins, it's a proven fact that Eugene Barge was standing in the middle of the road by his truck, and the shotgun shells were 20, 30 feet somewhere off the road. He was shot at a distance. There was no blood splatter. They didn't go over there and pick the body up and move it. She said, no, it was a hit. That was a hit. They shot and killed him and drove off. And I said, let me tell you where that blood came from. They also came down to Henry County. The Henry County Sheriff's Department had abducted Melanie Ann Hartsfield from college, brought her across the Henry County line. She called Marvin King. Marvin King comes to rescue her. They don't let either one of them cross the Henry County line. They take them to the murder site and sit around for a couple of hours for these yo-yos in Atlanta to come down and kill them. If you look at the evidence scene of the crime scene of Melanie and Marvin, they were both shot in a dirt road. Melanie's body bled out a little bit, but she was picked up and moved. There was no smearing of her blood in the road. No, I got it backwards, excuse me. Let's start over. If you look at the murder scene of Melanie and Marvin, they were both shot in a dirt road, and you can see Melanie probably weighed 120, 30 pounds. She had bled out, and they drug her over 100 yards into a pine thicket to hide the bodies. You can see the blood smeared. Marvin King weighed 185 pounds, and his blood is not smeared. 2 people picked him up. They did not drag him off the road. Jerry Banks couldn't have picked him up by himself by any means, but he was picked up. And in order to pick up a man that has been shot in the back of the head, when you put your arms under his armpits and you do the lifting, you're going to get blood all over your clothes. And I told her that's where that blood came from. I even made requests, and somebody with some clout could probably get this, but I can't. I left everything with Cynthia Atkins, and she was yes. You can't go to the GBI and request anything. I had to get the Henry County Sheriff to authorize and ask permission for the GBI to help look at this, because I wanted to clear Jerry Banks' name. So I left everything with her, and she says, I'll look through all this stuff and get back to you. And we discussed the bloody closed document. When I went back to get it, I walked in her office, and she said, well, I'm sorry I can't help you. Clearing Jerry Banks' name. I'm sorry I can't help you. Jerry Banks was guilty. And I don't want to talk about it. And I must have been so furious and so let down that I left her office and didn't get my documents. I mean, even if I got them then, the same thing would have happened. I went back later and got them and brought them home, and I started looking for that bloody closed document. It doesn't exist. But if, like I said earlier, if someone with a little more clout made a proper investigation, you should be able to go in there and say, I want to see every request of open records by Charles Sargent. And there's a reason for a request that should be on the form in their paperwork. And it would have been a request looking for the clothes found at the dump. I talked to Lisa Harris, who was at the records department for a while, and she actually looked for them and responded back. Can't find them. Can't find them. Where would they be? Well, maybe they were sent back to College Park or wherever the murder happened. But there's evidence that there should be evidence that I requested. Why would I request evidence of bloody clothes if I were making them up? Now I've got a time chart. I've got a timeline that I made, and I sat down on the table with Agent Atkins, and right there on Saturday, November the 9th, I've got a big red line drawn out from the bottom of the top timeline. GBI finds bloody clothes at the landfill belonging to the 3 guys in the white van. Now, why would I take that to a GBI agent if it didn't exist? I've still got that timeline. I just don't have the document. The sad part about it is I come home, my grandson got on my computer, and back in those days he was just a young kid and he's playing games, and he went on a gaming site and picked up a virus, and my documents were gone. I have paid $1,000 to a forensic organization that does work for policemen. I paid them $1,000 to go through that computer to find that document. But what they sent me back is more confusing than if they had sent me the directions on how to build a rocket ship. The evidence could still be there, and I not know it because it's not in the same format that I used to bring it up in my computer.
Well, I'm interested. So clearly Jerry Banks was framed, but was it just because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and they decided to frame a local black man, or was there a reason why it was specifically him? He did discover the bodies.
In my understanding of good police work, when a police officer has a murdered victim, when a police officer has a murdered victim, there's 2 people he looks at first. One who finds the body, and they did that. They framed Jerry. Jerry happened to be there with a shotgun, 12 gauge. But to frame an innocent man and to send him to die in the electric chair, knowing that you're framing him, has to be for more reasons than just saying, okay, we closed this case. You know, we can move on now. We've closed this case. You've got to be hiding your own guilt and your own involvement in the murder to frame an innocent black man who was a family man, mild-mannered. I just...
And I did some research into him. They let him out in the 80s. Whatever happened with Jerry Banks?
Jerry Banks spent 6 years on death row down here in Jackson, Georgia. He was 30 by 1980, somewhere around December 1980. He was 30 days away from being electrocuted. He was into his 3rd set of lawyers, 3 lawyers, who had discovered that the the test firing of the shells on Sunday, 3 days after the murder, never happened. They wanted to make it think that they found murder shells at the murder scene on Friday morning, and they were already sent to the GBI. So they wanted some time distance, which is chain of custody violation. They lied in court in 2 trials. Dick Barnes, Detective Howard, and Paul Robbins. They said they fired the shotgun on Sunday, during 3 days later, to produce the evidence shells. But that never happened. That it just so happened that a county commissioner, Bud Kelly, found out that that was testimony in court, and he says, wait a minute. I was there when they fired the shotgun shells behind the courthouse. I don't work on Sunday. The courthouse is not open on Saturday or Sunday. I was there. It was Friday morning. Friday morning, around 8 o'clock, they fired 3 shells and took them out and dumped them and planted them. Those were the 3 shells that went to the GBI as evidence shells. At some other point in time, they had to take Jerry's gun and fire it 3 more times to produce the so-called shells, evidence shells. We'll never know when they really, but
Had a full month to do it.
yeah, they had a full month to do it. So there's no doubt in my mind that at that point you've got to show that Henry County was involved in the murders of Marvin King and Melanie in Hartsville. And the only way, you can't have a better way of taking the heat off of you is to frame an innocent black man. Now, like I said earlier, in my early investigation into my book and a little bit post afterwards investigation, I used to just pray to Melanie, ask God to let her speak to me. What did she see that was so frightful? Her high school teacher went to the funeral, went to the Hartsville home and spoke to her father, and her father told her high school teacher that Melanie had come to him a week before the murders and said she saw something she's deathly afraid. And I thought she saw something that would upset Jimmy Glass's drug tracks. In my book, there's just a small article where a newspaper reporter from the Atlanta Journal asked Sheriff Jimmy Glass, we heard that Marvin King got into a fight with an unknown gentleman a week ago. And Jimmy Glass said, we've already looked into that. We've checked him out. He was out of town the day of the murder. What it was, that's what Melanie saw. That was the first attempt to kill Marvin and Melanie. That was the first attempt to assassinate them. But Marvin King lived, I guess, to die another day. Now, we're getting into an area where I have to be careful for libel. I have evidence to point to a person of interest that would have paid Jimmy Glass a pile of money, enough to spread around 3 crooked detectives, maybe even the DA in the courthouse himself, and still have enough money to pay the Dixie Mafia to kill Marvin and Melanie. I have to tread lightly.
I'll see if you can give me the name after I'm done recording. I can research myself, but I'll exclude it from the video because I totally get when you're investigating stuff like this, it's very easy to accuse the wrong person and take someone's family name.
I'll stake my life that I've got the person of interest. I'll stake my life on
And I suppose one final question from my list here. You mentioned on the phone call, just on the ride down, that the Klan was involved.
Jerry had already gone through 2 trials and found guilty in both. When his new lawyers discovered evidence like the police officers lying in court in 2 murder trials to convict a black man to send him to death row, they testified that they fired the shotgun on Sunday. And it never happened because the commissioner came forward and says that gun was fired Friday morning, early. So they took that evidence and some evidence that Philip Howard, the lead detective in this case, had been fired from Mora, Georgia for falsifying shotgun shell evidence previously in another case. So what they were having was a hearing to, I don't understand the legal maneuvers. It wasn't a trial, but it was a hearing to I guess clear the air and show that Jerry was innocent, and it was a case where you would think that the prosecution, the DA, would back down and say, okay, we're not going to try him a 3rd time. But they did say they were going to try Jerry a 3rd time. And in that testimony, in that hearing, I can't think of the name of the particular hearing, they put the questionable detectives on the stand. Jerry Banks' lawyers did, and questioned the very and he questioned the very detectives that lied about the Sunday firing. He questioned them about their involvement. Aren't you part of the Klan? He just out and out said, aren't you part of the Klan? This, that, and the other. So that was the and this guy must have had something to go on to bring that up.
Well, what I think is so interesting when I research, because I've been doing a lot on the 8100 file, the Atlanta child killings, and at the same time, you had, I don't know how much clout they had, but you had men like J.B. Stoner and Venable, and there were a lot of powerful people who were very right-wing in Atlanta at the time.
I invited my priest. I invited several other couples in my parish to fly to Washington when Pope John Paul II came to Washington, and we went to his Mass. He consecrated the Holy Eucharist, and we took communion from Pope Paul II. And on our flight, J.B. Stoner was in the back. Now, when J.B. Stoner gets on a plane to Washington, when the Pope's coming to town, that plane, it was so obvious the FBI following him. It was obvious and hilarious to me. But that was my run-in with J.B. Stoner. I wouldn't trust him in an outhouse with a rag doll. But I wasn't able to branch off into much of the Dixie Mafia. Robert William Johnson was eventually killed in South Carolina.
In a shootout,
I'm
right?
thinking 78.
Shootout with the police, I believe.
Yeah. He had pulled another shenanigan, and they were after him, and they actually chased him down a manhole into a sewer pipe, and they went after him, and they killed him right then. Thing about the thing about Robert William Johnson, it goes back to, why did the DA, Slayton, what's his name? Lewis Slayton. Let me go back to why Lewis Slayton, why I question his integrity. They didn't never go to trial. They let the guys go. And I would imagine, this was in 1974, 75, they let him go, early 75. I would imagine he was getting some flack. You're the DA. We have a police officer assassinated on the streets of Atlanta. What's going on? And I think he was under a lot of pressure to solve that case. But he couldn't solve it because his boys were involved. And he must have been involved. He finally brought charges in 1978 and had a trial for the murder of Eugene Barge. The only thing, Robert William Johnson was already dead.
I saw, and you said there's an understanding you can't accuse somebody you work with until after they're dead. They better be dead.
I don't think if I was Lewis Slayton, I don't think I would have let it out that I'm going to have an arrest warrant out for him, because there were so many dirty cops in Atlanta that probably had better connections with Robert William Johnson, the hitman, than he wanted to take a chance on. If the word got out that you're going to look for Robert William Johnson and you're going to charge him for murder, you'd probably wake up about 2 o'clock in the morning with a gun right up next to your head. I have no doubt about it. Robert William Johnson could only be taken to trial after he was dead. So what Lewis Slayton does, he gets this career Dixie Mafia thug out of prison and makes some kind of immunity deal that he will testify against Kathleen Love Scully. She's the female that actually laid in the road. They're charging her for the murder. She didn't even touch a gun. They were basically going to try Robert William Johnson, a dead man, by charging her as being accessory with him. So if they could find her guilty, they would be also...
So bury the case under even more.
Yeah. I don't think there was an honest person in that courtroom other than Kathleen Scully's lawyer. This guy got on the stand and he was telling this story about how he met Kathleen Scully right after the murders. She showed him a pile of cash that she had made for being involved in the murder, and he told a story that's credible. So somehow Kathleen Scully could have been in the plot. We're going to take you to trial, but we're not going to convict you. We want you to just play along, and then we can sweep this under the rug. They told a story of how Kathleen Scully had relayed all this information to this career criminal, and he was labeled as an organized crime figure, so a Dixie Mafia. Let me think where I'm going with this. The Kathleen Love Scully's lawyer, I don't think he was in on the dog and pony show. He questioned lead detectives in the Eugene Barge murder. And in questioning them, they asked the lead detective, Detective Tom Townsend, who was the #1 in charge of the murder investigation, didn't you have other suspects? No, we really didn't. We never had anything that really panned out. And I guess that's true because Lewis Layton set them free. But then he said, and he named the 3 suspects. White men in the white van that was apprehended and extradited back and run through 3 polygraph exams. He mentioned them by name, at least one of them. He mentioned the 3 guys and actually mentioned Rayner, one of the individuals. What about these guys? Did you have them as suspects? And he didn't recall them. The lead detective in the lead detective in Eugene Barge's murder, who is all through the FBI file and the GBI file. No, I don't remember those. I don't recall that. He lied under oath to clear the way to charge somebody else. It's just, the bottom line is the jury let Kathleen Scully go. And I think that was part of the plan.
Has she ever been contacted by researchers?
I can't dig anything up on her, but I think at the depths of corruption in this whole case, you can't put on a dog and pony show unless you've got some influence with the jury to make sure. We don't want to convict Scully because then she can spill the whole beans. Okay?
Yeah.
We just want to make it look like we made an effort. And she was found not guilty. Does that mean the Eugene Barge case, murder case, should be forgotten forever? No one has ever been convicted of killing Eugene Barge. And the files are so full of corruption that you take the murder weapon. When the 3 guys in the white van left the Atlanta Host Inn, room 218, they dumped everything in a dump and went to Florida, and came down to Henry County, committed another murder, then went to Florida. They found evidence at the dump, but they did find that had already been taken the day before. So when they actually went through the dumpster on Friday or Saturday, they found a Taurus pistol. Eugene Barge was murdered with a Taurus pistol. Ballistics proven. They found a brand new box with a serial number on the box in the dumpster where somebody else had left that hotel at a different time than the 3 guys. And he threw the box away. I think it was Robert Johnson. Now, no one has ever found the murder weapon. But the GBI says they did. There's a notation in the middle of a page, just out of nowhere, on such and such a day, such and such an officer brings in to the GBI a Taurus pistol with the serial numbers, blah, 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 blah. The gun matching the box. So what they're saying is, we found the murder weapon. When you find a murder weapon that killed a police officer,
You don't lose it.
no, the killer disposed of the gun. But when the police finds the gun with the serial number that matches the box that came out of the dumpster at the Atlanta Host Hotel, you don't just say, so-and-so officer brought in Taurus pistol, so-and-so serial number, and dropped it off. Meaning we've got the murder weapon. But don't you elaborate? Where did you find it? Who did you get it from? What were the circumstances? Where did you find it? There's a story behind a murder weapon. Nothing. Now this guy that had been well coursed, who testified against Kathleen Scully, he told a story that is believable and it's factual. He said that the team, the murder team, working with Kathleen Scully, she was the focus. They were trying to convict her. They said that he said, well, actually they were going to kill Eugene Barge on a Wednesday, November the 6th. And they went out to the area where Eugene Barge lived. And there was some type of trailer there, construction trailer or something. And he said they spent the night in that trailer because Eugene Barge went to work about 5 o'clock in the morning. They wanted to hit him as soon as he pulled out of the driveway down the road a little ways in that curve. But they overslept. This is in the trial documents. He's telling how the Dixie Mafia overslept. They didn't bring an alarm clock. So they had to go back Thursday. And he said that that's when they did it on Thursday morning. And he said Robert William Johnson, a notorious hitman, had a ritual that if he kills anybody with a gun, particularly a pistol, he leaves the scene and buries it within 5 miles and is never found. So how could some cop, how did he find the gun? I don't think he ever did find the gun. I think it's a false statement. Just put it into rest that we've got the gun. Now here's my theory. I'm Robert William Johnson. I'm getting paid to kill a police officer. He comes up and steps out of his truck, and I step out of the woods and I shoot him 3 times. First round goes off, second round goes off, a third round, it was ejected, a live round ejected on the ground. That was a misfire. He pulls out his trusty .38 Special Taurus, shoots Marvin, and he shoots Eugene Barge in the head 3 times. Now, do you go down the road about 5 miles and bury that gun? Normally, yeah. But his day is not over. He's got 2 other people to kill in Henry County. And his shotgun just misfired on him. Do you think he's going to bury the gun? No. He brought that gun to Henry County with him. He's no fool. He needed that backup gun. I think after killing Marvin and Melanie, he buried it on the Henry County murder site. I think it's out there right now. I think he buried that gun there because it's as safe a place to bury the murder weapon there rather than going down 5 miles down the road. Because if anybody found it, it'd be a crooked sheriff, and he's not going to tell on you.
Yeah, the case isn't officially.
He's the one that hired you. I think the safest place would have been to, and there's a stream that goes right by the murder scene. There's a pretty hefty stream right there. He could have thrown it in that creek. He could have dug. He drove a van. He probably carried a shovel with him in the back of the van. He could have buried it. A metal detector would probably find that gun. But I'm gonna tell you something. If I found it tomorrow, I wouldn't send it to the GBI because they've already lied and says the gun was given to them. But like I say, what kind of detective work gets their hand on a murder weapon and doesn't go into any detail about where this police officer found the gun, under what circumstances, anything?